Good. You're live.
Yeah, live.
Right, you're live. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming here to attend the very first Hyperledger Meetup in Bangalore for 2019. And a warm welcome to everyone who's connected to us remotely on via YouTube Live. Today we have a very special lineup. Some very special guests here. I'd like to introduce you to Julian Gordon, who is the VP of the Linux Foundation for Hyperledger, and he's based in Asia Pacific.
Okay.
Julian,
Yes.
For everyone on YouTube.
Hi.
So Julian has a very long and storied career at many of the industry heavyweights, HP, Cisco, Juniper,
HSBC.
I'll just let him introduce himself. The list is very long, and he has a very illustrious career. Currently, he is with the Linux Foundation, and we are very fortunate to have him here today. Thank you for coming, Julian.
Okay. Thank you.
And of course, Brian here does not need any introduction. He has an equally storied career, legendary in fact. He's the one who got the Apache server started, the Apache Software Foundation. He was one of the founders of CollabNet. He was associated with the WEF. And right now, he is the executive director of Hyperledger, which is one of the most exciting and fastest growing blockchain communities. Brian is going to be here to share his thoughts on Hyperledger and where it's going. And this will be something that he's been talking about at a number of fora. And we'll be very fortunate to hear about his thoughts on Hyperledger and the industry. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
And Julian.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Amal, and thank all of you again for coming out on a Saturday. I know it's a holiday weekend, and you're taking time away from family and gardening and other things that you hopefully do on a weekend. We'll try to make this fun. I also really, whenever I travel somewhere, I try to connect with the local Meetup community. So much of what makes open source software work is the face-to-face connection, right? Most of you probably don't know who works on Microsoft Office or who works on, an Oracle database. But in open source software, you really can get to know the people behind the software that you use, and I think that's a key to being able to trust it and know that it's a two-way street as well. You can get involved in those projects and contribute. And I think Meetup communities are critical to that. It's certainly been the case for Hyperledger. We have 150 Meetup communities around the world, 150 cities that have pulled together and set up something on either meetup.com or in China, there's an equivalent, I forget what it's called. But we've got about 30 of these similar communities there as well. And for us, we see it as a key way to try to bring people into not only more deeper usage of Hyperledger, different projects, that sort of thing, but to understand that they can engage in the community and ask questions and report bugs and hopefully report fixes to bugs, but also get involved in development and that sort of thing. So my hope for each Meetup community is that as they get started, and I understand here in Bangalore, there's been about a Meetup a quarter, maybe every other quarter. We would really love to see Meetup communities try to meet monthly, try to really draw from its community for content. And I want you all to feel empowered to submit talks, and perhaps even if you work for a company that has facilities like Intel, they can't always be Intel. Intel's very generous. Thank you for being able to host this now. But the ideal is that this community kind of comes together and finds once a month a different place to get together and share, especially technical content, share what you're working on, share the challenges you're having, what are the good ideas you have. We were just talking here with the Bosch folks about kind of a light client kind of idea for a project, right? This is where those ideas can hopefully be turned into new code and new projects at Hyperledger. So I really encourage all of you to get involved with the local community as well. So since I happen to be in town, and I came here for a couple of reasons. One, as Julian said, you have to get to India. And I actually came to India quite a bit between 2002 and 2007 when the company that I was leading at the time, CollabNet, had an office in Chennai. And so I'd go there, I would go to Delhi to speak at Linux Asia. I got to know the country quite well, but simply didn't have another chance to get back here. And then finally, the right conditions came together, including an invite to talk with a group of people at Triple IT Bangalore called Meetup, who are working on the next generation of the Aadhaar platform and taking that to other communities as well. They're very interested not only in open source, but in blockchain technology as a way to implement more of a decentralized platform for digital identity. So I was there the last few days, and amongst other meetings, we said talked with Amol about the prospect of doing a meetup, and that's why I'm here. So what I thought I would do is walk you through kind of a what's new with Hyperledger, where we are at the beginning of 2019. This is very similar to a talk that I gave at the Hyperledger Global Forum. I know some of you were there. How many were in Basel, Switzerland in December? Okay, great. So this will be boring for the three of you because there'll be a lot of repeat. But for the rest of you, it really was. First off, the Global Forum was about 750 people who came together in Switzerland in December from all parts of the Hyperledger community to talk about what they're working on, talk about the technology, talk about the use cases. And it was really a great event. It was 3 days, including a hackathon after that, including a lot of training and tutorial kind of content. And we'll do it again sometime either end of this year or beginning of next year. Because again, meeting face-to-face, not just at the local level, but now at a global level is really important. And as many of you know, Hyperledger is part of the Linux Foundation, right? And the Linux Foundation has a lot of different projects, of which Hyperledger is one. We're one of the largest now, one of the ones with the most traction. But we do find ourselves quite a bit at other Linux Foundation events. I'm trying to talk them into doing an event here in India on par with the events that they do in China, North America, and Europe. We'll see if we can get that going. But the Linux Foundation has a lot of other open source projects you all might find interesting. Such as the Kubernetes project, part of the CNCF, and automotive grade Linux, if you're in that space, and a number of others. So a lot of what I'll talk about is kind of in that context as well, that we're part of this larger community. And I certainly encourage you to find out more about that. So with that, let me dive in. As I mentioned, we're part of this larger community. And Hyperledger itself, as many of you know, is a community of a bunch of different technology projects. Right now, that's about it's 12 projects that have been accepted. One of them isn't listed here yet because we don't have a name for it yet. But it's kind of a supply chain focused project that we're still figuring out the right name for. But we have two different kinds of projects at Hyperledger. We have projects we call frameworks, which are really tools for building distributed ledgers. Some of them, I'm sure all of you know, Fabric and Sawtooth. I heard a couple of you mention Aroha, which is really cool. It's a bit more focused on payments and kind of fungible assets. Some of which you might not yet have heard of, such as Hyperledger Indy, which, as I mentioned, we've got a real keen interest in digital identity. So Hyperledger Indy is a platform for building decentralized, what we call self-sovereign identity approaches. And then Hyperledger Burrow, which I'd be really keen for those of you who have an interest in the Ethereum technology stack to take a look at and consider working with, because Burrow is an implementation of the Ethereum virtual machine, the engine that runs Ethereum smart contracts, and runs standalone as its own framework, but also can be configured to run on top of Fabric and on top of Sawtooth as well. And then we have a bunch of tooling. These are basically just tools that make it easier to use the framework, some of which actually work across different frameworks. And so tools like Caliper, which is a performance and benchmarking tool that runs today across Fabric and Sawtooth. And I think they've even gotten it working with Quorum and a few other kind of external tools. Cello, which is a tool for doing kind of blockchain as a service platform. So if you want to manage a whole bunch of different clusters, a whole bunch of different images of nodes running out there, Cello is a tool for doing that. Composer, which is a something I'm sure many of you have seen now. It's a front-end tool for kind of making it easier to get started with building your first blockchain application. Explorer, which is kind of what you would expect from a blockchain explorer, the ability to navigate through these different databases and see how the links are made. Quilt, which is a younger project, but this is a big play for us to do cross-blockchain compatibility. So if you want to correlate a transaction on one ledger with a transaction on another, this is a toolkit for doing that. It's an implementation of something called the Interledger protocol. And then a newer project, in fact, we don't have a kind of icon for it yet, a graphic for it yet, called Hyperledger Ursa, which is a collection of cryptography libraries that are being kind of pulled out of the other frameworks and other tools and kind of put together in a toolkit so that it's easier to audit, it's easier to have a standardized interface for using lots of different cryptographic techniques. It's where we can also then hopefully add zero-knowledge proof functionality so that it's easier to then bring to the other frameworks. It's very much a library kind of thing. It's younger, but a lot of good work is going on in there. And so this is a greenhouse, right? Is the metaphor that we've been using. There are other parts of this greenhouse, some parts that are technical. So we have something called Hyperledger Labs, which is a collection of projects that are still much younger than any of the ones here. Not really yet focused on delivering a product so much as being an exploration as some demo code, but also potentially we'll see projects come out of that. In fact, there's one there that's I'm really excited about called the S-Parts project, which is using Sawtooth actually as a platform to bring verifiability to software distribution. So all of the software repositories that you know about out there, when you hit update on Ubuntu and it goes and pulls software from different places, well, we all kind of trust that that works, but this is a way to add cryptographic integrity and kind of the integrity you get from a distributed ledger to a system like that. So lots of fun stuff happening there, and always room for new labs and always room for new top-level projects as well. But we're really trying to curate these and make these worth your attention and worth your while. Lots of interesting progress in the 3 years since we've been live, because it was really end of 2015 when we were announced, and February of 2016 when the first code drop happened. And in that time, we've had tens of thousands of different pull requests kind of come into our GitHub repos, 12 projects, as I've mentioned, almost 800 different contributors to the project. You know, and these are code contributors in particular, people who submitted a pull request of any form. Some of whom are full-time devs, obviously, but vast majority are people who have submitted a patch, contributed. This doesn't also include the hundreds who have contributed documentation. Or to the Wiki, or who help build the community. There's a much larger pool of those. Lines of code is really a silly statistic, but I'll mention it anyways, 11.3 million. As a project at Hyperledger, it's obviously code anybody can use, any company can use. You don't have to join as a member of Hyperledger or the Linux Foundation, but all of our work and my ability to stand here, and Julian as well, and to pull together the dev community and the commercial community comes from having memberships that help sponsor our work. And so we have 260 different corporations, some of them very large, like many of the employers here, some of them very much startups, who have helped us build this project by all of the back-end things that we do, which, by the way, does not include paying for any of the software development. We ourselves we view our role as being the air traffic control, you know, as being the facilitators, as being perhaps the highway that all of you drive on top of. But we're not about building the code. It really, the community has to come, and what gets built then is necessarily a reflection of what the community wants, not what I think should be built or anybody working for me thinks should be built. And that's really important. We also have a bunch of very active special interest groups focused on things like healthcare and trade finance. We have working groups as well, technical working groups on things like architecture and identity, as well as one that we launched a few years ago for China to try to help get China across the Great Firewall from a tooling perspective, from a culture perspective. And we'll be mentioning something at the end of this talk about India here as well. We have, as I mentioned, 150 different Meetup communities that have been pulling together. Some of those do meet on a very regular basis, once, sometimes twice a month. Others are much more sporadic, but our hope is that we really do pull these communities together and help feed the global community from that. And then we've had over 140,000 people take the free edX course that I think some of you have taken. That's really great because we're planting the seeds there, right? We know that it's still very early in the blockchain space. We know that there's still a lot of questions as where's the right place to use this, what is too much hype. While we're very focused on people like the 789 contributors and making them very effective and able to build code, I'm very much interested in the broad kind of base as well. How do we bring people through the door, help them understand what the code is about, and help get whatever they want to get accomplished. So that 140,000 perhaps is the broadest footprint if you want to think about where we are in the world. And as I mentioned, we're supported by our members, and so some of those involve very large companies, and even just recently we've added large companies like Alibaba. A lot of them are in T-Mobile and Citi. Some of them are startups. I'm sure many of you haven't heard of, right? In some cases, they are consortia like We.Trade, who are actually pulling these kinds of collaborative networks together. And as you can see, there's a pretty broad geographic distribution as well. In fact, about 20% of our members are based in China, which is unusual for any open source project. We've done quite a bit to ensure that this project can be a global project. Also in 2018 in particular, we saw all of the major cloud providers adopt deployments of Hyperledger Fabric and support Hyperledger Fabric at least, and then in many cases Sawtooth as well, across their clouds. So on AWS, on Google Cloud, on Azure, and of course, obviously on IBM Bluemix, on SAP's platform, Oracle's platform, and Huawei as well. And in China, Huawei, Tencent, Baidu, and Ali, who are all of the cloud providers there as well. They have named services. You go and you can say, I want to deploy 1 or 20 nodes on that network and build a network. And they'll support you in that. The blockchain as a service concept really came to a head in 2018, which is really great to see. And then let's talk about deployments, because there are a bunch of people, I mean, especially now that we're in the midst of crypto winter, right? And there's a lot of very justified skepticism about the B word, about the blockchain word. And a lot of folks who I think have grown despondent about what seems like billions of dollars raised and spent and lots of hype. We've always tried to be signal in the hype. We've always tried to downplay expectations in the early days because we want people to get started, start figuring out where this fits, and we didn't want to, despite hype being the first 4 letters of our name, we didn't want to contribute to too much noise out there, right? And there are people who said there's precisely 0.00 successful production deployments of blockchain technology out there. And that's wrong. And I'll go through a list of some of the deployments that are better known. There's actually so many here that we don't have the time. I don't want to spend too much time on them. But there's examples ranging from Swisscom, who have deployed now a fabric-based network for doing share registries, which is an essential thing. If you're registered as a Swiss company, you want to go public in Switzerland, they now use Hyperledger Fabric as the standard mechanism for being able to register those shares and register the trades of those shares across different networks. This is the equivalent of, say, NASDAQ or NYSE in New York City or the Indian Stock Exchange, those sorts of things. There's another deployment based in Singapore, but it involves a global supply chain involving farmers, particularly in Australia and Southeast Asia, who are using a distributed ledger platform to conduct their trades and raise trade finance, actually. In the 2 months that it had been in deployment, by the time these stats were generated back at the end of November, it had already processed $750 million worth of trade credit extensions. And that was only across 2,500 different actual transactions, actual trades, but those reflected on the ledger, 3.2 million different transactions recorded to the ledger, and 4,500 different farmers were being supported here. So, and this is DBS Bank, which is the largest development bank in Singapore, and a few other banks as well, and a small technology company called DLT Ledgers. So that was a really cool thing to see. There's another company called Circular that is focused also on supply chain, and they are deploying in Rwanda a supply chain to trace tantalum, which is another conflict materials. These are rare earth metals that are vital to the battery industry, the global battery industry, and where there's a lot of regulations and concern about where these materials are coming from. So they've got a traceability system, again, deployed on Fabric, tracing those. There's a blockchain that has been deployed for the airline industry, one for the food industry, the IBM Food Trust Network, also in Fabric. In fact, on the Food Trust Network, this is the network that Walmart is using to trace the supply of green vegetables. And they've started to now mandate that by the end of this year, all of their tier 1 suppliers will need to be on this network, so as to provide traceability in the case of foodborne illness. If there's lettuce that's in the store that is bad, that has E. coli in it, you very quickly want to be able to trace that back and figure out, do you have to take all the lettuce in the market off the shelf, which is very expensive, or can you narrow it down to lettuce only from one farm or one processing plant, that sort of thing. So that's important. Here in India, there is a network that has been running now for over a year by a company called Meetup, which is basically it's a KYC network to address the risk of fraud in the trade finance market. This is basically connecting 3 big marketplaces with each other, so in a peer-to-peer kind of way. They're seeing a lot of success there. I should also mention China Minsheng Bank has built a network with some of the largest banks in China, also again in letters of credit and KYC. And on its first day of production, they did over 100 million renminbi, which is about $16 million of trade extension, and now that's supporting about 1 billion renminbi per day. And then We.Trade, as some of you have heard, this is a big trade finance network that has been set up by Deutsche Bank, HSBC, Rabobank, Societe Generale, all these big kind of Western banks to try to make it easier actually for smaller banks that are their customers, and for small traders and suppliers to be able to more efficiently get letters of credit and follow all of the financing steps involved with getting product from source to market. So that's in production today as well. Lots more. I don't want to waste too much more time. In fact, and some of you have obviously heard of the diamond industry examples. At the Global Forum, we had a great presentation from Leanne Kemp, who's the CEO of Hyperledger, talking about the millions of diamonds now that are being processed through the system, and the millions of dollars that have already been blocked in attempts at fraudulent transactions, or diamonds of unclear provenance, meaning they probably came from slave labor camps, that sort of thing. But lots of other examples out there of production systems now running in all sorts of different industries, in healthcare, in logistics, lots of other fun stuff. So really cool. And this is the reason to be excited about this space, because this past year was really the tipping point, I think, where at the beginning of 2018, there were very few production instances, and they were just starting to do their kind of first production transactions. And now at the end of 2018, we're seeing a lot of things that were in pilot going to production. A lot of folks now starting to quantify the benefit that they're getting. And I think in 2019, we'll finally see, kind of the major analysts start to go, okay, this is now a sector that's worth tracking. We'll see additional rigor in how people think about how these production systems are set up. And one of the things that I had mentioned for a while that this space lacks, that the traditional crypto community has, cryptocurrency community has, is something called coin market cap, right? I'm sure some of you have seen this. Some of you perhaps sit there and hit reload every 5 minutes on it if you happen to own a particular token or something. But this is a coin market cap is a website that shows you, all of the different cryptocurrencies and their real-time price down to 10 decimal points, right? Well, you don't have that in permission blockchains because these are predominantly private networks, but also they tend to track things that aren't exactly a fungible value. They're not really tokens of, this one worth $5, this one worth 100 rupee or anything. Instead, they tend to be, the kinds of the transactions that I mentioned. So that makes it hard to compare apples to apples. But there is a network that's been set up by a member of the Hyperledger community named Jonathan Levy, something called the Unbounded Network, where it's intended to simply be a directory of the different permission ledger networks that are out there. And what's cool, so there's about 150 in this set now. 87 of those are fabric-based networks. 30 of them are Ethereum, but a lot of those are public ledger Ethereum dApps, like CryptoKitties, so it's hard to, it's really not quite so comparable. 16 of them are Corda, which is cool. 13 of them are Sawtooth. 7 are Stellar, 6 are Quorum. And we'll start to see Aroha once they're pretty soon, because Aroha will be heading to production sometime this quarter. And hopefully we'll see Indy there as well, as the Sovereign Network goes live this year as well. So that's pretty cool substantiation of the, how many people are actually using this code and moving forward with it. And that's kind of gratifying at this point. In our own community, we have something on the Hyperledger website called the vendor directory, which is simply, here are the companies and consortia that you can go to get products or services built on Hyperledger technologies, right? So it has many of the companies that are here in the room there, and all of the services you're providing to potential customers. A whole lot of startups as well in that list. And it includes people who are training partners. We've got 5 of those now, kind of a formal training program to really try to fan out and build upon the free edX course with better training materials. And I'll talk about that in a bit. And then we've also developed our own kind of blockchain showcase of companies that are willing to tell us a lot more about how they're using Hyperledger and to what degree they're finding success with that. And so if any of you are working on projects where you feel like, okay, we've got time now to be able to tell people about what we're doing, and there's some interest in sharing some information about what's worked, what hasn't worked, we'd love to talk with you. The developer community has really shined in 2018 as well. I mean, we saw some real interesting adoption of Hyperledger Burrow and the whole kind of concept of bringing what works from the Ethereum community into the Hyperledger community, and in general with building a bridge. Last year, we forged an alliance with the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, which are a set of companies who have been looking at how do we use Ethereum-based technologies in big corporate systems. They're very much focused on standards and not writing code. We're very much focused on writing code and using standards wherever they exist. And so it's a very natural complement. We've also gone pretty deep in asking the projects to all adopt Kubernetes as like the default container platform, and thus kind of the default way of deployment. Obviously, Kubernetes is a sister project at within the Linux Foundation, so we could be accused somewhat of bias in that respect. But it's really helped make it easier to develop with, to deploy, to monitor, to manage. Because now, I mean, it really does seem like Kubernetes is becoming the standard, application in the cloud kind of deployment platform. Aroha, Indy, and Composer are all moving closer to a 1.0. We'll see that this year. And with Composer, that's a community that we could really use some more help on. It's played a really key role in bringing new users into the Fabric community. We'd love to see that extended, though, to also support Sawtooth and be a tool for onboarding new devs there. And it's really clear now that there were 2 developers working on kind of the core of that who are needing some help because they are being asked by their employers to kind of work on some other things. And so if any of you have used Composer and were happy with it and feel like it's an important tool, even if you've moved beyond it, because it does seem to be a tool for bootstrapping and getting started, and but even if you no longer use it, but you believe in it and you believe it's an important thing, we would love to have your help in kind of moving that platform forward, making sure it can support new features in Fabric 1.4 and beyond, all those sorts of things. We've also seen the community rise up and develop white papers on performance and scalability in the architecture working group, as well as another paper on consensus. And we published an overall kind of Hyperledger white paper to help people understand at an academic level what we're trying to do. And one on identity is about to be published. As I mentioned, continued really terrific interest in Asia, particularly in China, but also obviously here in India. And again, a really dedicated focus on making sure that the project reflects the global nature of the blockchain industry, of the technology we're building, and the fact that there's smart people around the world, and we would be remiss if we overly focused on one region as we were building the community. So that's why we're going to try to be out here more. I'll try to be in India more. But really, the Meetup community is a key funnel for us to bring new developers into Hyperledger. And I already see on the Fabric mailing list and on other mailing lists lots of participation from people from this region. So that's really cool. Keep doing that. And then last year we had Hackfest in Montreal, Amsterdam, and in Los Angeles. And we'll have one, either a Hackfest or some sort of a boot camp or something in Hong Kong at the beginning of March. So if any of you can travel to Hong Kong, that'd be great. And hopefully we'll have a future one here in India pretty soon. Onto the project news. I mean, there's a lot to report, so I'm not going to be able to be comprehensive about this. And I would certainly encourage you to look at maybe the next meetup here in Bangalore, having somebody take a deep dive into, say, Fabric 1.4, which was just released last week. The big news there is that I mean, there's a few new features, but the biggest key one is that it's intended to be a long-term support platform. Right now, if you report a bug in Fabric 1.3, the response is going to be, well, please upgrade to 1.4 and tell us if you still have that, right? If you report a bug in 1.1, that'll be the response as well. And every open source community struggles with how far back do you support your old releases and that sort of thing. It's still pretty early in this space, so we've been encouraging people to stay very current. But 1.4 is the first statement from the Fabric developers that they're comfortable saying this is a known good tier because they're about to unleash a lot of more disruptive change on the path to a 2.0, which they hope to do either Q1 or Q2 of this year. I mentioned Hyperledger Ursa is a brand new project. Please get involved in that, especially if you are very interested in the underlying mathematics and the underlying cryptography behind so much of the different Hyperledger projects. And as I mentioned, there's another new project. We're still working on a name. Apologies for that. Right now, Hyperledger Grid is the one that seems to be getting some traction. And it's basically a platform that runs on Sawtooth, although it might be ported to Fabric at some point, on building supply chain deployments and applications. We also have a very healthy internship program with Hyperledger. We do 10 interns a year, and actually the biggest barrier to doing more of that is finding really good mentors for that. But this is a very public program. Interns apply to be an intern. Were any of you here an intern this year or the year before? Okay, because I know we had a few here who were based in India, but really the biggest challenge is finding mentors. So if you are, if you feel like you're pretty well in the development groove of any one of the Hyperledger projects, and you're willing to mentor somebody over the course of the summer on a specific project, we would really love to have your help with that. I spent a lot of this last year traveling as well. I didn't count my frequent flyer miles for last year because I was just scared it might be 7 figures rather than 6. It's probably 6 figures, but this is me standing in Antarctica. I went down and spoke at a conference in Chile, and they're like, hey, as a speaker gift, we'll take you to the Chilean research base in Antarctica. So that's me wearing my Hyperledger shirt with a bunch of penguins and ice floes behind the scenes. I also did a lot of speaking. This is me at Davos last year. I'll be heading next week with Joe Lubin from Ethereum, kind of giving him some side eye as he started to talk about more of the wacky kind of cryptocurrency things. Although we are working, we have a very good relationship with Consensus. Again, we want to see more Ethereum enterprise technology out there. So, but really, it's the Meetup community, and there are many things we're trying to do to actually spread this beyond me because I'm not very scalable. If that hasn't been obvious. I do travel quite a bit, but we're trying to really find people in our community who can be technology ambassadors, as I mentioned, people who can be mentors, but people who are willing to go and give talks, whether it's a room like this, whether it's to a university, whether it's be helpful at a hackathon as a mentor, right? Because there's lots of these hackathon competitions now in the blockchain space, and having somebody there who can help get new developers in the room bootstrapped with the development environment on Fabric or Sawtooth would be really great. So please let us know if this is interesting to you. We also have a Hyperledger member summit that we do once a year. The next one is looking like it'll be in Japan in July. So if this is interesting at all, the past one was October in Montreal. If your company is a member of Hyperledger, that company gets 2 free tickets to attend. So please let us know if you're interested. But this is really more of a chance for the community privately to come together and figure out what do we want to do over the next year. One of the other things we've launched is a certification program for developers for both Fabric and Sawtooth. And this is a step up from the edX course, a step up from the free tutorials and other training we've provided. This is a course, and we work with training partners on this, or you can take this directly through the Hyperledger website. This is a course you pay some money, and at the end of this you take a test. And it's not a real easy multiple choice, fill in the blank kind of thing. The test involves, here's a running running blockchain. Here's an SSH shell. Go in and fix what's wrong. So this is really a good test of your ability to understand how these systems work and when things go wrong, how to fix them. But these are administrator certifications. And so this would be a key thing to put on a LinkedIn or your other resume to be able to really attest to the fact that you know what you're doing in these circumstances. So the Sawtooth one is live now. The Fabric one is in beta, so you can sign up to take that for a discounted rate. We're still working out some kinks, and then it'll go general availability sometime this quarter. And then I kind of have a wish list that I gave to the Global Forum community, and I thought I'd repeat it here for you, just to give you a sense of what's on my mind these days. We're looking at, now that all the clouds have adopted Hyperledger Fabric, and many of them looking at, or in some cases support Sawtooth, we feel it's time to start to talk about certification of cloud providers as well, so people know that their blockchains are portable between these cloud systems, or most importantly, when you launch a blockchain or a Fabric network or a Sawtooth network, even if you launch it initially at one cloud, you should be able to add nodes from other cloud without any technical limitation, right? Without any concern about interoperability. And so we'll be pulling together the developer and the cloud community to try to come up with certifications over the course of this year. We'll also look at certifying the solution providers in this space. There's lots of startup companies, consulting companies, dev teams that are hungry and ready to work on projects. There's a lot of funded startups or big companies who are like, we'd like to get involved, but none of our devs know how to do this. Who can we hire? Right now, we do a lot of one-on-one matching between people when we hear about that, but a systematic way of certifying solution providers based on how many certified developers they have, how much they're contributing code into the different Hyperledger projects. All of that would be key to helping build an even more efficient marketplace, I think, for hiring of that talent. We know we need to do better on the community metrics as well. We've kind of we've done a lot to try to understand the community, but getting real benchmarks on how frequently we're doing releases, how frequently we're responding to bugs that get reported, how often questions go, quickly questions get answered, that sort of thing. We know that there's more we need to do on that as Hyperledger. In fact, the Linux Foundation is working on a number of different fronts on this, including a major open source project called Chaos, ironically named, if you're interested in a toolkit that could be deployed for any open source project to help understand the health of those open source projects. We know we need to reach out to developers beyond just the blockchain world, because so many of you're not working for blockchain companies, right? You're working for Accenture or Bosch or other places where blockchain should just be a tool that you use. These technologies should just be a part of the standard IT kind of toolkit, right, and architectural kit. And so getting more of that, getting more out there into other developer communities, and getting this as making blockchain born actually is one of my goals. It might sound like a weird goal, but if we could just make it something people pick up like any other architecture, that would be great. We also know that within the Hyperledger project itself, we should be doing more dog fooding. People know what the term dog food means. It means using your own code, right? So looking for ways as an open source community to use our own blockchain to record any of the artifacts in our development process. Perhaps it's this S-Parts project that I mentioned. Just more things like that, finding ways for the open source community to understand how these systems work in a very public way, in a way that can't be public when we're talking about your deployments, your work. More production networks, obviously, more metrics around those, more insights, more componentization within Hyperledger, like you see with Ursa, where we pulled all of the cryptography routines out, finding other types of refactoring that we might do across those different frameworks, across those different tools, would be really key. And then finally, people ask, what's our relationship with Ethereum? I've talked a bit about that, or with a lot of these other public blockchains. A lot of this year, we'll see a lot of those get shut down, I think, because the funding disappears, the energy disappears, and that's natural. This is kind of, there's a cycle to innovation, which kind of, I guess it was called the Gartner cycle, right? Where there's, you know, the peak, the trough, and then kind of if it finally actually does create value, what's called the slope of enlightenment, right? Well, right now I'd say we're kind of at the trough, especially on the public ledger side. We'll see a lot of projects start to pull back. Some might even be rolled up. So there will probably be interest in people saying, hey, can we just throw our code over at Hyperledger, let you take it on? We're not interested in that. We're not an end-of-life strategy for somebody else's project. But if there's interesting stuff that different public ledger communities have figured out, like the Ethereum smart contract language, but others, we're very keen to see, you know, can we fit that in to the collection, to the portfolio of projects that we already have. And so if, I'm sure some of you have been working with some of these other technologies, if you think there's a bridge to build there, you know, my role is executive director, but I'm really geek diplomat. And so I've done a lot of outreach to other communities, and I'm happy to do more of that. And here in India, I mentioned there's something we wanted to announce. So now announcing today, the Hyperledger India regional chapter. What this is a chance for us to try to pull together developers across the Indian subcontinent who are interested in helping with the Meetup communities. Obviously, we still have Meetups in each city, but we felt that there was a real need to pull together people across the subcontinent to talk about ways that, you know, the cities might work together to do developer events, to make sure that each city kind of has a great Meetup program, to think about things, whether it's localization, whether it's supporting developer events in India. You know, we're very keen to see how do we help grow the community here, not in parallel to the global community, because we certainly want you to help and contribute to the global developer community, and to, if you have a bug in Fabric, to go to the Fabric developers, right? But sometimes, again, getting to know people face to face, getting to build the local events, maybe local hackathons or developer sprints would be really cool. And so Amol is helping launch that as the lead here. We are going to be looking for additional leads, probably in different cities, so we get a bit of a fan out with that respect. But there's a mailing list that you can join today, and we can send this deck around. I think the link has been sent. So you can sign up for that mailing list. There's also a Wiki page and a Rocket Chat channel that we've set up for it. So please come and join, and let's engage in that. You find out more about us at the website, chat with the other developers at chat.hyperledger. There's a lot of different ways to get involved, perhaps even too many. I apologize for that. But we try to be as transparent as a community as we can, and as accessible as we can. But it also means if you see something wrong, if you see something that you don't quite understand, don't look at us as, we're not going to be polished. We're not going to be as as beautiful as, say, a larger corporate website might be. We'll do our best, but we really want to involve you in continuing to up our game. And so if there's time that you have that you'd like to help improve something that you see could be improved, but even if it's documentation, even if it's just helping answer somebody's question on the mailing list, we would value and really appreciate your help with that. So with that, I think we want to move on to the next step, which would be having a panel. Right?
Yes, thank you very much, Brian. Thank you.
Sure, and I think instead of answering questions directly, we'll just answer them as a group.
Right, exactly. That's
Okay.
how we're doing it, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I'll need a mic as well, right?
And Ashraf, we've got those two mics there.
Dr. Ashraf?
And we could probably turn the light on the front up.
Yeah, we need to have a mic. Exactly. That'd be easy to say.
Four people. Yeah. And if you didn't get a chance to introduce yourself when we went around kind of earlier, when we start taking kind of questions from the public, feel free to tell us your name and kind of what you're working on, or what your interest is, what brought you here on a Saturday, before you ask your question. So do we want to jump into questions? Or
So we're going to basically, I think first we've got some other people here, right?
That's great.
So Ashraf from Corello Blockchain Academy. So please, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about what you're doing in blockchain, and specifically in Hyperledger, associate member of Hyperledger.
Good morning, and nice to be here in Bangalore, and I represent Kerala Blockchain Academy. We started the journey back in 2016. Started looking at blockchains. primarily from the public good perspective, when we officially launched Kerala Blockchain Academy in the early 2018, and what we do is primarily capacity building. So we are technology agnostic. We provide training programs both in Ethereum as well as Hyperledger. And we have programs at different levels of complexity. We have programs right from awareness programs, which runs for 30 hours, which gives a view of the entire blockchain umbrella, including both public as well as private, and a little into the business adoptions. And it typically runs either through a week or over the weekend. And we have so far trained 250 people across India on this program. And on top of it, we have multiple development programs. And the primary one, the first one that we launched is Hyperledger Sawtooth. And we are collaborating with Intel in designing and launching the program. And the first batch is out. We've already trained 50 people out there. And we also have a program which is running currently on Ethereum, which is again a developer program, deep dive. And we are working with a few other partners to have developed programs on other technologies, including Coda and Fabric and all that. So, and these programs, the development programs are typically running for 90 hours. We have 60 hours of training within that program and 30 hours on a real project at our partner location. And out of these 60 hours, we run only 15 hours of theory. The rest is a controlled practice environment where you'll be given code steps and you start working on an actual real issue or a problem or a business problem. And the CSD one, the Hyperledger Sawtooth one, we have already done with 50, and another is scheduled in February. And our students come from across India today, and we even have, we'll be launching one such program in Middle East very soon. So that's one part of the training part of it. And we also have projects. We work on a project which is for community policing, primarily developed on Intel Sawtooth for Kerala government. We had a recent flood, and we had multiple projects which are publicly as well as privately funded, and government wanted to track what's happening on ground with the social audit being enabled. So we have built a platform for that, which is getting into production very soon. And we also work on a healthcare project, which is again Sawtooth, primarily to deal with immunization data for Government of India. And on the fabric side, we have multiple projects on supply chain traceability. So we currently stand at 15. We have 15 developers, scientists with us, and we are expanding that to 30 very soon. And we are a Hyperledger associate member. We have partnered with Intel and a few others on the Hyperledger side. On the Ethereum, we have partnered with MLG, and we work closely with blockchains and the Vitalik ecosystem. So primarily, we have a group of developers offering programs, and we provide these programs at an affordable price. That's what we do, because government subsidizes a lot of it. So there are certain entry criteria and entrance tests, and if you clear it, you get it most of the early programs for free. And on top of it, we charge nominal price like 6,000 rupees to 15,000 rupees. So basically, we provide programs at scale without compromising on quality. So that's what the Kerala Blockchain Academy does, and we also work on primarily like development projects, which do have a public good angle to it. So that's what we do.
Thank you, Asha. And now, do you want to introduce yourself to Accenture?
Yeah. Good morning again, everybody. Rajan Muthuswamy. I'm one of the vice presidents within Accenture, and I have, like many of us here, I do have multiple roles there. But in context here, I lead the Accenture Center for IBM Technologies, a center of excellence on IBM technologies, and more focus on Fabric and IBM blockchain platform as a blockchain as a service model they have. So we try to bring that into life for our clients, work closely with our blockchain capability within Accenture when in Accenture, just to take a step back, so we have a strategic growth initiative on blockchain. We try to support on Hyperledger and a few other digital assets, R3 and Ripple. So we have coverage across these areas, and we try to focus on the industry front. We try to focus on supply chain, digital identity, and also on financial services, like some of the modules within the financial services domain as well. So these are our core focus areas, and we have probably many of you might be knowing here in this area. Next door within the ecospace, we have a new innovation hub, wherein we have our blockchain liquid studio. Likewise, we have it in various other cities across geographies, but the one which we have here is really special, and I guess Brian is going to be joining us sometime this week, into next week, that is. So we do bring in clients, and we demonstrate what we have. And that is not just on blockchain, but we have a broader, this complete innovation hub on all technologies, where we have a separate space or pod for blockchain. And we do put kind of, that's where the rubber meets the road kind of situation, where we try to have our developers. I am happy to see many of our core developers and architects also part of the audience. We are trying to certainly put things together and work on various initiatives across geographies for our clients.
Okay, well, thank you. Will, have you actually introduced yourself? I don't think you have yet. Who's our sawtooth, and tell us a little about what Intel are doing here. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Amol Kulkarni. I head the blockchain program office at Intel India. And we do a number of things related to blockchains over here at Intel in general, but also here in India. One of our main focus areas is sawtooth development. So we are some of the sawtooth core developers located right here in this building. We work not just on the sawtooth core, but also on other Hyperledger projects. We've contributed quite a bit to Hyperledger Caliper for doing benchmarking for sawtooth as well as for Fabric. We work with IBM Fabric, so IBM on Fabric collaboration to just figure out how to get it to run better on Intel machines. So that is one of our very important focus areas, which is to make sure that any blockchain technology, any blockchain software will run very efficiently on Intel machines. So we're working very closely with a number of blockchain providers over there. And also we do a lot of community outreach, a lot of education initiatives, a lot of workshops to raise awareness, to build the community, to help companies start adopting blockchain and to start contributing back to Hyperledger.
Okay, great. So I think we've got a certain amount of time. So I think maybe I was going to ask a few questions. Maybe we go straight to questions in the audience here, right? And then I've got a list of people who've given me questions through the WhatsApp group, or maybe just one quick question. So to all of you. So how, if somebody here or somebody online or somebody watches this in the future wants to get involved in Hyperledger, maybe they're a developer, what would be the first step? How should they get involved? Maybe Brian, you can start that.
Well, the top of the funnel is the Hyperledger homepage, right? www.hyperledger.org. And we're always trying to refine its format, always trying to refine how you figure out where other things are. Because the community is kind of broad and kind of messy and organic, I plead for your patience. But from there, you'll find both kind of stories about how people are using it, what are some upcoming events, and then the different resources, right? One of the most important of which for developers who are interested in asking questions, going further, is the Hyperledger Wiki. And the Wiki is really, I mean, if the Hyperledger homepage is kind of somewhat, I don't say corporate controlled, but kind of more officially controlled by kind of us as the Hyperledger staff, the Wiki is what the developer community really owns and manages the content around. And on the Wiki, you'll see, for each of the major projects, what are the different upcoming releases for them. What is their status? There'll be links to the bug database to see what are the outstanding bugs, how to report a bug. Both on the main webpage on the wiki, I think you'll find links to training and other content. And then the other big things we do are the mailing lists and chat, right? So, and one might ask, why do we have so many different ways to engage? Well, I've been a part of open source communities now since 1991, before even the term open source was used. And for me, email has always been the red blood cell of an open source community, right? It's the main kind of vehicle for communicating, especially with the audience of developers, in a form that is both informal, but also still permanent, right? And you should always be able, on an open source project, when a change is made, something's checked in, be able to trace back why that change was made to a conversation, maybe to a bug that's been reported, but ideally when there's some, especially an architectural shift to be made, or somebody doesn't quite understand something, an email archive serves as a much better way to go and look at that and understand that in 5 years than, say, trying to crawl through the archive of a chat log, right? So this is why email is still, to us, as archaic as it is, perhaps the core kind of communication platform for Hyperledger communities. Now, we do still also have a chat system. This is using something that's kind of like Slack called Rocket Chat. And it is designed more for the real-time kind of, hey, I'm having difficulty getting something set up kinds of questions. And we also do use phone calls quite a bit, probably more than I would like. In fact, if anyone goes back and sees my first email message introducing myself to the Hyperledger community, you'll see my solemn vow to get us to use less teleconferencing. And then sadly, I think I've completely failed in that vow. Because we do still have quite a few of the developer communities will have a weekly call. We also have a weekly technical steering committee call, which is like the main governance that we have across the different projects. And unfortunately, those calls take place at very inconvenient times for people in this time zone, in China and Singapore. So we're really trying to encourage more of the development activity and the more of the decision-making and information sharing to happen through email, to happen even through chat. But there's still a lot of important things that happen over the phone calls as well. All the phone calls are open. There are also minutes taken of those and posted to the wiki. So you can still participate even if you can't make a call. But those are some of the vehicles for figuring out how to get involved. But most importantly, I'd also say those 12 different projects we have, we really leave it up to the developers on those projects to figure out what is their development roadmap, what is the way that they make decisions. As long as it's transparent and accessible to any of you, if any of you are motivated and have the skills, you should be able to become a core contributor on Fabric, on Sawtooth, on Quilt. And if there's anything we do that keeps that from happening from a tools or process perspective, hold us to account for that. Tell us, email me, or anybody involved in the project and say, this is something that should be fixed. Sorry for a very long answer to a very short question.
Very, very succinct. You covered a lot of material. So thank you. And maybe more from your perspective, I think Brian talked about the challenges of time zone and everything like that. So how do you think this new chapter and things that we're looking at, how do you think that will help? And how do you imagine that the community can probably come together here in India as well, rather than just attaching? Obviously, they have to connect to the global community, but how do you see that panning out?
So I think one of the things that's been missing is a lot of folks who want information, who want to learn, or who just want to get connected, don't have a very formal, don't have a means or an organization or some place to go and find information, right? A lot of things happen on Rocket Chat, but there's also but because of the nature of Rocket Chat, things just get lost as more and more messages come. So what we want to do is have regional chapters, city-wise chapters, where you know your local community, right? And you can go reach out to people within your local community and kind of try to find answers and just have a forum for discussion, have a forum for sharing your thoughts and bouncing off ideas, right? As we build a larger community, as we build more contributions, I think that is going to be very important to have a close-knit community locally that you can go meet up face-to-face or over phone or whatever other communication medium that you find useful, and we'll try to facilitate more of that. The other thing that we do for Sawtooth, and I think that might be helpful to see if we can replicate that, is we have weekly developer calls. So while we try to steer everyone towards Rocket Chat and email, we recognize that that is not always helpful. So we provide one more option. So we have a developer call every Thursday at 2 p.m. India time, and we've selected that time slot so that that is a convenient time slot for anyone sitting all the way from Shanghai to UK to call in and ask questions, and we'll try to solve them real time. So if we have something like this that is well known and that is accessible to people, it gives this kind of a support to people, right? That hey, if I'm jumping into this, I know that there will be someone to help me and guide me.
Can I add one more thing I'd love to see happen at a regional level, which is helping people find a job. And if you have like a need to hire somebody, and we should figure out ways so it doesn't feel like it's an abuse of the system, right? You know, because certainly if somebody posted every day, you know, I'm looking for a job, that would be bad. But you know, we're all about helping people solve real problems with this and make this a part of how you make a living. This is not about charity. This is not about purity. This is about, these are technologies to deploy in enterprise. And so let's figure out like what are the right types of job bank kinds of websites to channel people to, you know, or other mechanisms to be able to help support people in their career development around Hyperledger.
Okay, great. I think actually maybe we'll some questions from the audience. Is there any hands up? Okay. Yeah, introduce yourself, where you're from. And, yeah.
Hi, my name is Karthik. I head the practice of blockchain at Indian Software. So I've been involved in the blockchain for the last year and a half, and almost on both Ethereum and Hyperledger. And Hyperledger kind of have quite a few implementations on Fabric, and we're trying to move to Sawtooth. Now, my question is, see, on one hand, we kind of are seeing a lot of development on the underlying tools and the frameworks, and we're trying to get them better and faster, as you said. Now, I kind of have, over the last 1.5 years, seen there's a challenge in people adopting it as a solution. Right? And there are a few people who have come forward and said, yeah, we need this, and they're very clear about what they need. And then once you show them how things work, they probably go back and say, okay, probably I can have a better solution. So somewhere I see there's a challenge in the adoption of the whole thing, right? So do you have any kind of pointers where I can talk to them saying, probably make them at rest and say, okay, this is good to adopt. Sorry, it's a long question.
Well, I think there are many examples of systems going in production. There's many things globally, but maybe Accenture or do you want to talk a little bit about your experiences?
I mean, as we are heading in this journey, obviously, yes, there's going to be so the hype cycle, as Brian pointed out, it's going to be hype, and all of those noises going to settle down, and the real ones going to survive or come up with the right solutions. And as a service model or as an offering, addressing a business problem, building that offering, I mean, that's what we try to focus within Accenture. If you look at it, we try to even collaborate with some of these as a service models across the vendor ecosystem, including IBM and all others, AWS and all of them, to see how we can come up with a specific offering which addresses this particular problem, or one specific client's problem, or one specific industry problem. So with our breadth and depth of clientele, we are able to focus in respective industry groups. We are able to designate teams to work on solving specific industry problems and come up with the right offerings. To answer your question in a roundabout way, but certainly tackle the business problem and make sure that it is addressing the complete cycle, or having the problem solved through whatever we are trying to accomplish. So that's something which we see as coming up our way, and we try to put solutions around each of those respective areas and have those addressed.
So we keep facing this problem every other day. I think a month back we had a session in Toronto with the Pop Tapscott from the Tapscotts. And we also, there also we face the same problem, like nothing goes beyond POC. How do you convince the other side of the business that? And our thoughts are, we need to have sandboxes, and we need to have mechanisms through which best practices and options and potential successes are published to the world through white papers. So we started talking to our government, Kerala government, and what they said is we'll identify opportunities within government, and with some little grants, we can enable people to work on projects. And if they are successful and can prove that this adds value, we don't have a problem publishing it out, you taking that to the external world. Primarily providing sandboxes by agencies which can afford to have a little of a grant to prove that certain things are workable in a context is the solution that we have in mind, and Kerala government has offered us support in that niche.
I think I'll just add. So there's a lot of things that you expect from mature platforms, right? That I'm fine with this, but if you want to talk that we're seeing now that we're at kind of the 3-year mark, and we're seeing things like long-term releases, things that go beyond the software though. So things like the cloud hosting options. So now you can more or less go with a click of a few buttons and stand up a running Fabric network on all these different options, right? And that needs to be even easier and simpler, but that's something we didn't have a year ago. You'd have to kind of provision your own Amazon EC2 instances or whatever. Better training materials as well. You know, the stuff that we did on the path to setting up the certification programs involved creating a lot of content, all of which will be out there and available. And then it's the certification that costs a little bit of money because there's some human labor involved in grading the tests and that sort of thing. But a lot of that is kind of as an onboarding to getting more developers up the learning curve more quickly without having to kind of swim by themselves. I would love to see more things in Hyperledger Labs that are demos or examples. And so as you build your solutions for things, it would be great to see if there's something you can tease out that is not specific to the client or to the situation, but was something you built to assist getting something stood up. Consider bringing that in as a lab to Hyperledger. And then there's things even beyond all that. Things like, blockchain networks are hard to launch in particular because there's no such thing as a blockchain of one, right? So you're not really ever solving just one company's problem. You're having to get a set of companies to even agree on the same requirements is hard, let alone like the same day to launch a network, right? Let alone like to all that accept the code and then each stand up, perhaps you bootstrap it by running nodes for everybody. But until people are running their own nodes or running in the cloud, kind of what with sovereign separate control, there's not really a point to doing it on a blockchain. And frankly, there's a lot of things you could use a blockchain for that'll probably still be easier to solve with a central system, right? So we all just need to be honest about that. And those I think become barriers to making the case for it, to coordinating all the pieces beyond the software, to getting it to launch. I'll end with another important thing I think is, a lot of these networks work because there is a partnership agreement or a legal agreement between the different entities running nodes in the network, right? That kind of defines who's on the network or who's not, and you say, what's the jurisdiction we agree to, what's the, all that kind of thing. And bootstrapping those are hard because that's something well beyond what we as developers can do, right? What I'd love to see either somebody come up with out there and we can point to, or maybe we do it as a project in Hyperledger, is collect together kind of model legal agreements for forging these kinds of networks. And try to find something that works in as many jurisdictions as possible, kind of like the way open source licenses have come to be an international standard for how to treat intellectual property in an open source community, right? Maybe a similar set of legal standards for building permissioned distributed ledger networks would be useful as well. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, just another thing. Have you mentioned SIGs, another area that obviously people talk
The
about
special
industry.
interest groups,
Yeah.
right? So we launched in healthcare, in trade finance, in the public sector. So if any of you are working with governments, you're in the public sector working with this, right? Yeah. These are really just knowledge sharing networks, but if any of them generate requirements or any of them generate interesting ideas for new projects, we hope that is one potential output, or even just white papers, on the ways to use these different technologies for government applications or for social impact, I think is the fourth SIG that we have. And we're looking at additional ones in additional sectors, right? But these are really a pathway for us to talk to, developers and even the business crowd in these different sectors on what do these technologies mean, how do they work, and how might you get started.
Okay. Thank you.
So my question is, there are a lot of memes which which says that which color of blockchain you require, because it has become an obsession that implementing blockchain everywhere. So in this case, basically the blockchain was created to address the issue of trust. So in that case, but at the same time, you see the processing speed goes down when you bring in that point. So how do we see this point of blockchain being obsessed in all the other fields, like blockchain on AI, blockchain on machine learning or something like that? So how do we see this, and how does Hyperledger help in this kind of view?
The thing is, I come from a background in machine learning. I work in the area of machine learning for the last 17 years. So, I'm from Tata Institute of Science. And we we realized that anything to do with learning needs credible data. And blockchain is a mechanism which can move trust to an infrastructure in a mathematically provable way from an institutional context. So you can replace institutions which are trusted with trusted infrastructure. So if you ask me why, as a machine learning scientist, I would say the moment I need to have trust in data pertaining to a collaborative environment where the participating entities doesn't trust each other, and if I want to build models on top of it, yes, makes sense to have data sitting on blockchain clubbed with machine learning. There's no point in saying like every other ML needs a blockchain backend. Rather, if the context demands a blockchain, yes, merging it, marrying it makes sense. That's one aspect of it. And we also work on, I'm primarily a researcher. I work on machine learning applied to different contexts. We have India's largest IoT incubator called Make a Village. And that is my earlier project, which is located in Kochi. We have researchers working on IoT and blockchain on very similar terms as that of adapt. When it comes to IoT, we talk about centralization, primarily moving data, and decentralization can be a potential driver for adoption. Decentralization of compute as well as storage. And now, when we bring in decentralization, we need trusted infrastructure over which data can be recorded and leveraged. Yes, blockchain is but one such opportunity. So, marrying blockchain with IoT in a context where you need decentralization makes sense. So, if the question is, does bringing blockchain to every other context make sense? I don't know. I think that doesn't. Unless otherwise you have a case for a blockchain, marrying it with a different context may not always make sense. But there are situations where that can bring in value. And to your question on performance, yes, the public do have performance issues. Do you really need public in the context in which your problem is lying? yeah, that's something that only the contextual information can clarify. So we still do have intranets and internet. We still do have controlled networks as well as public networks. Do we need both? Yes. And do we worry about performance over intranet at times? Definitely yes. So is public, right? So performance issues will be addressed, and that's where the science part of it becomes important. And people would be more interested to pursue that part of it. So we need to have effort on improving the underlying science behind blockchain, and possibly combining with potential areas of interest where blockchain as a data infrastructure makes sense. That's it.
Just to add to what he's saying, from our side, clients always come to us because just because blockchain is there, they want to somehow force fit blockchain into any of the problem-solving situations, and we do walk them through a decision tree, taking the core factors behind the features behind where a blockchain solution would fit in, be it immutability or do you need an intermediary. So all those factors, right? So we all know within the blockchain space where a blockchain problem or how a problem can be solved through blockchain. And we try to walk them through the decision tree and not to force fit blockchain in every single situation. And yeah, eliminate those kind of problems, or trying to solve problems where blockchain might not be a appropriate solution for them. So we want to make sure they are seeing blockchain as the real solution. And to address your other part of question, I refer back to Brian's greenhouse structure for specific problems or specific areas, domains. We already have variants even within the Hyperledger umbrella for identity versus permission versus so you have various flavors of the offerings even within Hyperledger, even outside in the blockchain space. So probably worth looking at the specific problems that we are trying to solve and relate to any of the specific offerings or the platforms to use for the right situations.
Yeah, hello everyone. Yeah, this is Himanshu from Accenture. So my question is, so we have recently done the performance in Hyperledger Fabric. So we are facing, while increasing the nodes, we are facing some scalability issues. So what are all your plans to increase the performance?
All right. Well, none of us are Fabric maintainers, core contributors. I got a microphone. Core contributors. So we don't have any plans. But I know that obviously within the Fabric developer community, there are companies who are facing the same kinds of use cases that will drive high volume, right? And for comparison, remember in the early days of the web when there was something called the /dot effect? Does anyone remember that term? Where if your website appeared on this very popular Reddit style kind of website called /dot, which is still around, I still read it, by the way. You were, if it appeared, and you weren't, a big company like Intel with massive web resources, you were almost guaranteed that your website would get crushed by the traffic, right? You'd have too much. These days, we know how to scale even small websites, using CDNs, even free ones like Cloudflare. We know how to, if your boss came to you and said, tomorrow there's going to be 20 times as much traffic to the website as there is today. Also find not every bit of data needs to be written to a blockchain. It might be enough to write things to a side DB or to an S3 bucket or something, take a signature of that and write that to the network, or write a batch of 100 signatures at once, something like that. So there's going to be a whole set of techniques. Some of them kind of manual, some of them, things that are familiar to the database world, like sharding, right? Some of them pretty hacky, but some of them will be core layer 1 and layer 2 improvements. That'll just take time. What I hope emerges in order of not too many years is enough of a collection of techniques and broad enough understanding of how those work and tools that make it easy to adopt that you can answer that question of how do we scale it by 10x tomorrow anytime somebody asks you to do that. Because the worst thing in the world is to have a popular application that suddenly the biz dev team has gone and signed a bunch of deals, and tomorrow everything goes down because you can't support it. So I think it'll be a problem that solves itself in the long term. Okay. And if you're interested in helping, we have a whole working group on performance and scalability who are working to define kind of standards for how to measure that, how to measure your own instance of it, and do capacity planning and that sort of thing. So, but it's something that right now is more art than science, and we're aiming to make it more science.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
I'm Nitin from SAP Labs. So I've been working on Fabric for like 1.5 years from 0.6 version to 1.3 right now. So one question that we have faced from various POCs or pilots that we've done with customers is that let's say SAP is working on one solution. For example, IBM will come up with another solution for the same domain or same problem area. Now, for a customer, if he has to use both of these solutions, both of these blockchain solutions, then how do we merge it? Because right now the question is, everybody is doing an innovation on the blockchain. So at one point of time when all of these solutions go into production, it will happen that there's a lot of competition, but blockchain is not. How we envision is it's not a competition. It's basically solving a common problem across the globe. For example, if you see trade, international trade, where the ocean shipping trade happens, IBM has a trade lens, for example.
Yeah.
You will know that, right? Similarly, other companies are coming up with their own solution now for an ocean liner, like Maersk or CMA CGM or MSC, or for that matter, US Customs or any customs authority around the world. They cannot use. They will not have multiple nodes to tap into each of these blockchain networks, right?
Right. I'm sorry. I'll let you finish the question.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that. So the problem here is how do we converge to one single node, or how do we come together in this network and give one solution? Because one solution cannot fit in for everybody. Because IBM will say, no, I have my own solution. SAP will say, I'm coming from different. I have a lot of integration to existing ERP systems. IBM will say, I have so many vendors or partners in this network. So, how do we converge it? Because for one customer, going to different blockchain networks is not a solution. So, what is the view for that?
And I'll jump in, but I do want to hear from others on the panel on this. So, the great thing about standards is there's so many to choose from, right? Is the famous quote. And I think there is a tension between standardization and competition, and that manifests itself in the protocols. The fact that we have Fabric and Sawtooth and Iroha and Indy, and there are places where opportunistically they're starting to work together, like adopting Kubernetes, like adopting, say, Burrow as the EVM engine, those sorts of things. And I'm really keen to find other places, but I'm also never said from the beginning, hey, we all have to be only one architecture. We all have to have the same APIs, because I believe it's good to have competition. And I think to some degree the market will hold us to account. There's a second layer of that competition now, which is the kinds of networks that are being built. So in any given sector, like trade finance or diamond traceability even, I would expect that at the very least in the early days, and perhaps even indefinitely, there will be multiple networks in each of these different sectors. And if you are a major player, you might have a node on two different networks, right? And those networks will compete. They'll compete in a number of ways. They might compete on the protocol and the stuff built above the protocol, the smart contracts and chain code and other things being used. They will definitely compete on governance, because I bet one of them will have a high bar to join the network. You have to prove this, you have to agree to this legal agreement, and one of them might have a lower bar. Just attest to who you are, maybe put some money as a stake, that you lose if you violate, or something like that. And the high value network will probably get a lot of things done, and the low value, the high bar network will probably, solve some really interesting uses. And the low bar network might have a broader network of participants, right? That kind of competition is natural and okay. What we will see, I think, is mergers of these networks, especially if they're using the same platform, right? It'll be easy to do, but even if one of them has to shift platforms, because it is going to be true in the long term that the larger the network is, the more valuable it is to its participants, right? Moore's law, or not Moore's law, Metcalfe's law still applies. But I think you still need to have the room for somebody to say, I've got a better approach to governance. I've got a better approach than what everyone else thinks to the smart contracts to use on this network. And so that competition isn't a bad thing. And my sincere hope is that it's the end users who drive that kind of change. And I think because of the nature of blockchain technology, they're more empowered to demand, to hold the governance organizations to account because they have a copy of the data in a way that today you can't hold Facebook to account, right? You can't hold Uber to account because they have all the data in the center. In a blockchain network, all the participants have the data. And if the person running the network or the governance organization or whatever it is, or even a big 800-pound gorilla on that network is not playing fair by the broader interests of the network, they can all fork. They can go in their own direction. And I think that's a healthy thing. Just like in open source software, the right to fork is a key thing that keeps open source communities working and accountable and healthy. So I don't know if anyone else wanted to add anything.
Yeah, you rightly said, Brian, and maybe the biggest player, obviously, with the clients or the business partners who are trying to achieve their or solve their problems using multiple platforms when they are trying to compete against each other. Obviously, when they have dominance there and the right of having their partners or suppliers within the network, when they are competing against the other one, the dominance obviously comes into picture. Like if I have to quote to the IBM's food trust network, where IBM is trying to drive that with Walmart. So they are bringing their suppliers, tier 1, tier 2 suppliers onto the network. And if they are not willing, obviously, there is a value for the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers to get on the network, even though they might have some other channels or partners being part of some other blockchain networks as well in their ecosystem. So if they have to come into Walmart, if they have to plug into their system, obviously it's a market-driven or business-driven approach there.
So my thing is, let's say Walmart is going
If
for.
you can get him a microphone so others can hear. Sorry.
If I'm audible, then it's fine. So my thing is, see, Walmart is going with IBM Food Trust, for example, right now. So Walmart will have multiple suppliers. Now, if those suppliers are a different network, not with IBM, right? They have their own nodes. And they say, okay, I have running my own different smart contract. So do I need to get a new node? So what will happen in future is that you have multiple nodes to handle, and that's not scalable in production scenario, right? So,
It might be, it might not be. This will be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Certainly, complexity is never good for its own sake, right? It's something you always want to try to manage. But I think, especially if the underlying software is open source, so there's no real licensing cost associated with having multiple nodes. There is potentially a operational cost, right? But if you have a standard tool that allows you to manage your presence on multiple networks, that boils it up in a dashboard kind of way, right? And there's technologies like the Interledger protocol that allow you to potentially move assets or correlate transactions across networks. Maybe we make it easier to manage that complexity. And there's a cost to the complexity, but there's also a value. So I think water will find its own levels.
True. So basically what will happen is the transactions will not be same. For example, the food trust will have a different type of transactions, and another software will have, another network will have different types of transactions, right? So the compatibility between these transactions is also not straightforward. You need to have a lot of complexity involved in that, right? So I think, time will tell. We have to see how it goes, but this is what we have seen from the conversation with customers. They ask these questions now as to, if I have multiple different vendors and different networks, then how do I operate? Is their biggest challenge, and then it's the biggest iteration for not going for a blockchain solution. So
sorry to interrupt. Actually, we are running out of time. So next question.
Yeah, that's fine. So we can discuss offline.
Yeah, you guys can discuss offline.
Yeah. Lots more to say.
This will be the last question from the room, and then we can start from
And I've got
WhatsApp.
2 quick questions I'll do from you guys live. And then, yes.
I'm Syed Akram from BMS College of Engineering. So I have a few questions. Anyways, more or less it's been discussed, those questions. My first question is with respect to the transaction latencies, though it's answered, but I want to repeat it again. Transaction latencies in blockchain system. So is there any best measures that's been taken? Care, one. Second is with respect to in a company, if we want to implement the blockchain in their core infrastructure, is the feasibility and maintenance an issue? Though it's been discussed again, so I'm repeating this. So, and third question is with respect to, like you said about competition, but what about the standardization? Blockchain? Yeah.
Who wants to take any one of those three?
So yeah, standardization already Brian did cover. So there's going to be too many standards coming into picture, and the regulations all around the governance of the networks and the approaches from these various frameworks coming up. For sure, it's not. It could be geo or geofenced thing, location based or within specific geographies, having specific regulations put into picture or put into place to govern or address any of these points there. So probably that's one aspect to it. I can think of. It could be driven locally driven or in specific geographies, because it's going to be again business problem for specific geography, and it could be standards. And also the other angle to it is on the industry side. So if it is one specific domain that this problem is getting attained or solved, so that within that consortium or within that domain, the governing bodies are going to have standards defined or published out, so which various of these platforms will have to adhere to. So that's my take on the standardization part.
And on the standardization of the consortium thing, the one thing I'd add would be, I think for participants in a marketplace, figuring out who the governing entity is, the entity that permissions parties onto that network, and trying to find a way for that person to be as neutral, that organization to be as neutral as possible. Perhaps bootstrapping off of existing neutral organizations and marketplaces, such as, I mean, regulators are not perfect for a lot of reasons, but folks like DTCC. In the US, DTCC is kind of the registry for all of the private equity shares of companies. If you go public, for example, your shares are registered to DTCC, and when people do a stock market trade, they're not actually moving paperwork, in the form of stock certificates from one place to another. They're just changing pointers in DTCC's database. Well, DTCC is now becoming a blockchain network. They will still kind of set rules for who can be on that network, and they'll be the governing entity. But now each of the different brokers and traders will have their own node on that network. And so that's, I think, the best kind of way to be thinking about how to structure the marketplace around is find who these neutral operators are, or these neutral consortia are in each space. Back to your other questions really quick on latency. Distributed systems have this trilemma, what I think is called Zuku's triangle, right? Which is consistency, scalability, and finality, right? And so if you need immediate finality, you always trade off on the other two. I think we do, just to echo the point about needing further research, we do need additional consensus mechanisms and additional algorithms work to figure out how to further optimize those trade-offs. But I think you're always going to be making a decision, and that might weigh whether you decide to use something like Fabric, which is really focused on immediate finality and being able to get an entire network to consensus, versus things that use more of a Nakamoto consensus kind of approach, somewhat like Sawtooth, like Poet in Sawtooth. And I think diversity of choice right now is pretty important as we figure out what are the best ways to do it.
And also, what kind of use case you want to use it for.
Right, because in some use cases you're fine with 10-minute latency, and others you need or want 10 milliseconds.
And perhaps your use case is not conducive for blockchain at all. You want immediate real-time finality.
Yeah.
So last question.
Yeah, thank you very much for the session. And as an entrepreneur working in carbon footprints or energy usage, I just to give you an example, right? I mean, I see a big use case for blockchain or say Hyperledger in this arena. And just to give you an example, for example, to produce 1 kg of fabric or clothing, we emit 25 kgs of greenhouse gases in the air. Or a normal blue denim uses around more than 3,000 liters of water during its lifetime. So I mean, I see a huge case in accounting all these things using something like blockchain. But as an entrepreneur, I face a lot of problem because the community is not very active here, right? So, I mean, you actually addressed this question, but I would like to specifically ask, say, Accenture or Intel, I mean, developers are working here, how open these developers are to the entrepreneurs outside Accenture or outside Intel? right? Can we just walk in and talk to your people or your people, and can we collaborate, and how does it work out?
Yeah, great question. So we have answered for your problem or your question right next door. So within Accenture, we have different verticals. So one of them is Accenture Ventures, where we do work collaboratively with startup ecosystems to bring in and have them incubate with us. We have specific space within our innovation hub and in our facilities, where we do provide all the necessary support and have them like work collaboratively with the venture capitalists and the startup ecosystem partners, and bring up these problem solving dimensions to whatever the entrepreneurs are bringing onto the table. So we do have full support on that, and I mean I can put you in touch with the right folks as well.
Okay. I'm going to take a few questions now from the live. I think actually most questions have been answered, right? But one that they talk about here is basically, we have a number of different frameworks out there, things like Corda, like Quorum. So they're asking about comparisons, but how do you think that works out and with all these different, and then obviously the second question, what's the interoperability between these different chains? How do chains talk to each other?
Yeah, well, so I imagine there's some of you out here who spent a lot more time working with Corda or even with Quorum than I have, right? So partly all I have to go on are really kind of the descriptions and what I know of the different platforms. First off, let me say, early on when I joined Hyperledger as executive director, it was actually after it started. When I got there were two projects already, Fabric and Sawtooth. And we knew, it seemed to me that there was going to be a big question from our going forward. Were we going to be an umbrella, a greenhouse, pick your metaphor, or were we going to consolidate and be one? Because, in the Linux project, there aren't many Linux kernels, right? There's one Linux kernel. In Kubernetes, there's not multiple Kuberneteses. There's one, container approach. And there's a cleanness and a focus that comes from that. But I also felt like, the operating system arc was pretty mature when Linus wrote his first kernel in '91. He was building off of 30 years of operating system research. Even containers, the idea of building containers had been around for about 10 years when Kubernetes was launched. So we didn't have that legacy of understanding what we were building and putting it in a box the way that those other systems had. Plus, I saw some real differences of opinion in the public blockchain space for sure about how these kinds of systems should be built. And so I asked the community, decide, do we want to be one or the other? And the feedback came, let's try to cover the bases. Let's think of this as there's a solution space that needs to be mapped. Some ideas are going to be good and turn into real viable products. Some might not be. It might fit a certain niche. Take a very Darwinian kind of concept of this, right? Random mutations, if you will, mapping a solution space. And so we went for the latter, and I think that has really paid off because Fabric and Sawtooth are really very different at a very low level. It's actually harder to describe their differences at a high level. You can use either one of them to build most applications out there for the same reason that you could use either MySQL or MongoDB to build most database applications. But all of you know that you're going to choose one rather than the other for certain reasons, right? And likewise, I believe very strongly in having, at this moment, diversity of choice and to allow the market to tell us how those sort out. And for us to look at, especially since we're an open source project, right? We're not driven by license revenue. We're not driven by market dominance. And I even think the network effects matter at a small scale, but don't really matter. It's not like at some future point, everybody's going to be on Sawtooth or everybody's going to be on Fabric. We're going to have these different networks. We're going to have bridges across them, the Interledger protocol, for example, and others. And so I'm really happy to see Corda out there. And I really hope that they find their niche, right? The right kind of thing it's appropriate for, which does seem to be appropriate for, and that's not to say the others aren't, but it certainly was built for the financial use cases out there, right? Not so much built for supply chain or trade or KYC or healthcare information sharing. Not built for identity. In fact, the Corda community has built a connection with Hyperledger Indy, so that you can use Indy as your identity provider and then conduct your financial transactions over Corda. Quorum was also more of an early stab at figuring out about does this enterprise Ethereum kind of thing work? And it does look like that's true. And you're seeing other Ethereum kind of permission ledger approaches happening out there. Consensus launched something called Pegasus. I'm glad that those are out there. It gives Burrow a little bit of competition, and we'll actually see if there's ways that those projects can learn from each other. Because again, that's some value of being open source, is teams can share code. You know, if Burrow comes up with a good idea, others are more than welcome to it. And so I'm really hopeful that we still have this kind of diverse ecosystem out there. It makes life hard for you. I apologize for that. It means you're going to have to learn about the differences between these platforms. It makes life hard for my marketing team when they show that greenhouse and somebody asks, well, tell us what the difference is between Fabric and Sawtooth. We want to know if you use it for healthcare, you use Sawtooth. If you use it, you know, and we say, no, we can't answer that. I'm sorry. But I think for the time being, it pays off in the form of helping us more quickly map that landscape, get smart about, and ultimately more quickly to ideal architectures for whatever use cases emerge.
Okay, I think we're just about to run out of time actually now, right?
Let's
So
stop giving 10 minute
if that's okay, I think we answered most of the questions. And anyone there live, you know, you're on the come approach me and we'll answer all the questions that we haven't answered, right? So I say thank you to everybody here. Thank you to the to speakers here and the panelists. Thank you to Intel, and I'd like to actually thank also Rajiv and Ankit, who run this meetup here, right? And I think Rajiv, you'd like to say a few words to the group, to your meetup group here, very important part of our community. Before we wrap up, thanks.
Thanks, Julian, for sharing the mic with me. Yeah. So yeah, I would like to thank Brian and Julian for sharing their time with us, and the Accenture colleague for sharing his views, for like Amol to sharing this venue. Like Intel is cool. So yeah, coming Intel inside is really cool. So that thanks for sharing the venue with us, and Kerala Blockchain Academy for all those blockchain stuffs and tech stuffs. Thanks to all of you, and you know, taking the notes from your talk, and we were also planning something beforehand to, you know, throw it at the community and take feedback, and then we can take forward from here that how, you know, we can drive this community forward in near future. So there are a few things which I'd like to share with you guys. So I'd like to see, you know, hands-on coding going on here in the meetups, not just a presentation going on. So we can take few small topics, and then we can do the hands-on coding here, and then that's how we can, you know, make this meetup group thriving forward. So one thing is tech meetup each month, and second thing is hackathon twice a year. So the team is planning hackathon in coming March this year only in Bangalore. It's called Behlendorf, and we are about to, you know, start the promotions and all those stuff. So I welcome, you know, Intel, SAP Labs, Accenture, Kerala Academy, and Hyperledger to support us for this. And then we are also curating list of mentors based out of Bangalore who can help beginners to start with Hyperledger repositories over webinar. So this is really important. You guys can sit at your comfort of your home, and then you can just do the webinar and at least help those beginners how they can start coding. Not just the contributing from, you know, event management or all those stuff that can be done, but coding is really important because we have to contribute back to the repository. So that's the third thing. And the fourth thing is we are also creating a panel which is called How Can I Contribute to Hyperledger? So it's an open source platform curating all the information regarding Hyperledger for beginners. And the fifth thing is Hyperledger for business. It's just an idea in our mind, and we'll work upon the roadmap and we can discuss on this in later end of the month. That's all from my side. Thank you for the community to coming us. Like we didn't, you know, expected this number. Like me and Julian were discussing about this, like, are we expecting 1/3 of the member or what's that? So thank you for coming, and thanks all.
Just one point here, we are making a group called Blockchain Research Group. Primarily, we have buy-in from IIT Madras, ISI Kolkata, and few others. Professors have agreed to be a part of the group. The agenda is to identify problems in science and the underlying science behind blockchain, put in public domain, connect researchers, potential researchers out there, and come up with solutions, publicize it, and make open source contribution in that context. If the Bangalore meetup is interested, we'll be more than happy to operate primarily. Like you can run the show, and we can back up So we'll be able to bring in resources across the globe, primarily resources can contribute back to the science part of it. And if corporate entities are interested, we can make this a India opportunity to make a blockchain research group with potential partners across the Indian institutes as well as the corporate entities.
So by science, you mean you're looking to publish papers or?
Publish papers, primarily publish papers and build solutions around it, put that back to the open.
Are you associated with IISc Bangalore as well?
ISI Kolkata.
Okay.
ISI, I'm a part of IISc Bangalore.
The research group there.
Yeah, I come from IISc's background. I study there.
Okay.
So I have easy access to IISc Bangalore.
Okay.
And I do have most of my batchmates. Even though I don't look very old. So yeah, I do have colleagues in most of the IITs and IIMs. So I also have a background in IIM. I was a faculty in one of the Institute of Managements. So we have access to most of the faculty out in India and even outside. And some of those faculty members, somebody from IIT Madras, somebody from IISc Kolkata, has agreed to be a part of this show. Primarily pushing research further from the Indian continent. So if you can take that as another agenda, we would love to have researchers getting associated with it, putting papers, researching on core issues related to blockchain, and then let's publish, let's put in open source, and do some public good happen.
I would invite all of you to come forward and let's have a picture.
Yes.
And
Super.
let's,
All right.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Over the phone. Yeah.
Where do we stand?
Should we stand the background? I think that's better.
Yeah,
Yes, everyone come forward.
Come forward.
Come forward. Come forward. Yeah, sorry.
Probably,
And we have